Hi, it's Patricia Martucci, licensed marriage and family therapist, and today I want to talk about trauma reenactment. And I want to talk about this because I think it's a topic that a lot of people don't know about. And for most of my clients who I've shared with them more so what this is and how it might show up in their life, many of them are relieved that there's a word for what they're doing, but they're also surprised that they didn't really know that that was a thing. And so, what trauma reenactment is, and this can happen in many different scenarios. It can happen in relationships, it can happen with a trauma like an accident. And so basically what trauma reenactment is that there's been something that's happened in our life that has been traumatic to us, and the reenactment part is we have a pattern that throughout our lives, or even one time or two times or whatever, for a lot of people it's an ongoing pattern until they realize what's going on and how to get help for it. But they will recreate the traumatic situation and try to have a different resolution. And this happens a lot in relationships, especially I see it a lot. I work with sexual trauma, so I see it a lot in sexual trauma in romantic relationships or sexual relationships, really, where what can happen is if there's a case that there was a rape or there was a situation, it could be sexual abuse or something where a person feels out of control and feels like, something's happening to them that they don't want to happen, and they, don't have control over it, right? And so, and they get traumatized, and there's a wound and there's a patterning around that. And so what they can do is then recreate unconsciously situations that are similar, and the brain kind of wants to recreate those similar situations to try to get a different outcome, to try to get control over something that we didn't have control over. And this can be incredibly painful for people, because what it looks like is putting yourself in the same traumatic situation over and over again. And unfortunately, most of the time when that happens, you're going to get the same outcome. Because if you're putting yourself in a traumatic situation with a person who is not well, which would be somebody that would be perpetrating this trauma, typically they're not going to be in a place to give you a different result. So, there is something to be said for having healing experiences in the present day with like a new relationship, which is totally different. And I think what we're really looking to do long term in terms of healing. But for these patterns and the clients that get stuck in this trauma reenactment, it can be incredibly painful for them, incredibly uncomfortable. They can be very misunderstood. It's kind of like, well, why does that person keep going into that same dangerous place, or with the same kind of person, or putting themselves in these situations that are incredibly dangerous. And that's actually one explanation as to what might, be a way to describe the why of this, in some situations. So what can help with treating this is, first of all, knowing that you're doing it, getting help from a trauma professional that can help you just discover and to recognize really what's going on. It's really hard to pick out on our own. I don't know that it's possible. Some people will read a book about trauma and understand, wow, that's what I'm doing. It can be really helpful to have support when you're trying to create a different pattern or trying to make choices that are different than the choices that are connected with this repetitive trauma. So that's briefly what trauma reenactment is, and I hope this helps to understand a little bit more about trauma and how it affects the brain. All right, see you soon.